Greetings to all of our hospitality lovers on the other side. It's great to be here again. Welcome to WTF, Walk the Floors, where we talk about all things hospitality training. I'm Michele Kline, one of your co-hostess with Kline Hospitality. I'm here with Stephanie Ledger with First Rate Hospitality. Stephanie, how are you?
Great, Michelle. How are you today?
Doing wonderful. Tell us a little bit about what to expect today.
Yeah, so we're so excited. We have our guest, Brian Proctor, visiting us today, and we're going to be talking about hotel transitions. So we're going to be talking
Ooh,
more
nice
about on that
topic.
corporate side. Yes. So, Brian, welcome to our show and give our audience a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's always fun. Enjoy the podcast. And, having a podcast of my own, yours is awful professional compares to mine. So it's hopefully I don't slow you down here. But, I'm an old guy, so I'll do this career thing pretty quickly because otherwise it could take a whole show. But, I started off in, when I was really young, wanting to get in the hotel business. I'm from Montreal, Canada originally. And long story short, went to school for it up in Montreal, and started working as a night auditor at the Westin in Calgary, Alberta, as the first gig, and then progressed through some ITT Sheraton roles to the point where I helped with the opening, which kind of probably led me to my transitional phase. But I helped with the opening of the Sheraton in Halifax, Nova Scotia, as the front office manager. And that was my first exposure to an opening and all of those things. And so found that I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But my goal had always been to get down here to the States. So I was very fortunate that I was given the opportunity to move down to the States with ITT Sheraton to the Sheraton in Stamford, Connecticut, which is where I started my American reign here, but also luckily met my wife there. So did the smart thing, married the American, got my green card, and we're good to go. So, but then oddly enough, we got married, and then Four Seasons Hotels came a calling, and as a Canadian kid, if Four Seasons Hotels calls, you just go wherever they tell you, and they sent me back up to Toronto, of all weird things. But eventually got me back down to Los Angeles at the Four Seasons Beverly Hills, and then left to join Interstate Hotels so I could become a general manager at a earlier age than I would have with Four Seasons. Couple GM positions with Interstate. Then this new company called Starwood Lodging was being formed, and some of the original execs were from Interstate. So I came over to Starwood and had a great 18, 19-year run with Starwood with a variety of positions, general manager positions, and a variety of corporate positions, one of which was the VP of New Builds and Transitions, which is apropos for today's talk. And then obviously all things with Starwood came to an end when Marriott bought us. And I decided to move on, joined Evolution Hospitality, which is a phenomenal, boutique hotel company. Then got, realized that third-party management companies work way too hard, and I was way too old to work that hard. So left there and started in a new segment of the hospitality field called service departments with a company called Bridge Street Global Hospitality, which is an absolute phenomenal industry, one that doesn't get enough press over here in the States, but it's kind of fun. So that was a cool gig. Then I decided in 2020 to retire because I'm old and I was tired. So I retired in August of 2020 and set up Leeds Hospitality Group, which is a consulting company that I run, and set up my Tuesday Thanks podcast. And so that is within 5 minutes, I guess, of a career gone sour, I guess.
So, Brian, I'm inclined to say that even though you keep stating that you're old and tired and you don't want to do this anymore, you just can't get out of it because you love it so much.
Well, I look at it now as it's really not work, right? Because I'm not working full time for a company. I'm not, back in the day with Starwood with the new builds team, we were flying 250,000 miles a year. We were opening and transitioning hotels everywhere from Bora Bora to Aruba and everything in between, and every brand, every size, every type, every ownership group. And, so it was, but I didn't think I worked then either, right? Because it was so
Yeah.
much fun.
Mhm.
So as long as you're doing something that you like, you don't really feel like you're doing too much. As long as
Absolutely.
you interrupt my
Absolutely.
golf game now.
And then also too, even with the schedule, how we were doing the scheduling even for this podcast of, I know that you were on vacation with your family, and that's what's kind of nice now too is making your own schedule as well.
Well, making your own
Mhm.
schedule and just being able to work from anywhere, right? So back in 2001, when we started the new builds and transitions team, we were already working from home because I was based in Indianapolis at the time. Our corporate office was in White Plains, New York, and we were on planes every week. So we were working from wherever. So we were doing the work from home way before work from home was cool. But it does allow you that freedom to, you can go on vacation and still get some, work done. I don't consider the podcast work. That's a passion of mine. So as long as I'm not working for a client on my vacation, the podcast is just fun time.
Cool. So let's get into it, talking about the hotel transitions. So for us operators, I know we all of a sudden will hear, oh, we're going to be going through a transition, but we know that there's so much that is leading up prior to the operation team being notified. But can you walk us through what's those early steps like with ownership? Vetting on the different brands. How does that all work before all of a sudden operations is now being told we're going through a transition?
Yeah, I mean, it really
Mhm.
varies, right? Because there's different types of transitions that you have to take into account. There's an ownership change, there's a brand change, or there's a management company change, or some combination of multiples of those.
Mhm.
So the base of it is basically typically the transitions will be because the hotel is being sold. And so at that point, the purchaser coming in normally will have a hotel management company that they like to work with. And so that's where it all really begins to saying that, hey, we're going to go buy Hotel ABC and we're going to convert it to Hotel DEF brand. And that's where it kind of starts at the corporate level is with the development teams coming together, selling our team and our brand or our management company to that new owner and partnering with them when they come. So each one's a little different, but that's typically the easiest way to think about it is that new owner is coming in and they want to work with their management company of choice.
Perfect. And a lot of people don't realize too, us because we're in the hospitality industry, but there's owners who own the actual structure and then working with the management. They just don't realize, like, for example, Sheraton or Ritz Carlton doesn't own the actual physical uh, land, I guess you could say.
Well, exactly. In the early 80s and 90s, the brands owned a lot of them, right? They owned and managed. And then we all went through that asset light process of selling off all the assets to owners who would then hire management companies. And so that was a whole transitional business model as well as you go through those properties. And that's why it's so important to, when I said I had to get out of Evolution because of it was just too much hard work on the third parties. When you're a good third party operator and you run a really good hotel, guest service scores are high, profits are high, revenues high, guess what? The owner realizes, well, geez, now my hotel is worth, 4 or 5 times more than I paid for it. So now I'm going to sell it. So a lot of the times, the reward of running a really strong property is that it's going to get sold. And that could mean they would bring in their own management company. It doesn't make sense that they would
Yeah.
change it, but that's just the way it is. So it's kind of a pain in the neck to be successful sometimes because
It's
you work
yeah,
yourself out of a
exactly.
job.
The risk associated with success.
Right. So I always wanted to be mediocre when I was a general manager. That way,
That's a great.
that
Please
way the
let's
asset
promote
never
that.
sold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. Okay, so then now we have, all right, a property ownership, for example, is being sold, and your experience when they're reaching out to you, working for Starwood, and now deciding what brand of the Starwood. How does that all happen as well?
Well, I mean, back then we had a team, right? So the development guys would come over to me and the local regional teams and say, hey, let's say we were taking over a Hilton project, or the owner was asking us to go into the Hilton project. So we would go in and assess, do a full market research. 9 times out of 10, we were already in the market, so we kind of knew the market, but we'd go into a full market research. Then we would, under the radar, go to the hotel and visit, whether with ownership, okay, or sometimes you just go on your own, but most times it would be arranged. Really get to understand the property. We'd have all their financials. We'd look at the financials and everything. And then we would talk about which brand would work best in there, which brand could be put in there economically for the owner, because if you're changing the brand, that's very costly to the owner coming in, because so much has to just be flipped out. So you'd kind of go in and do that, and then you would go to the owner and say, okay, we think this should be an X because of ABC, and then kind of allow them to say, okay, does that work? Does that work for their lender? And does that work for our brand? How long will the renovation take to make it the brand? How long do we run it as an independent? I mean, again, I could go on for a whole show just on the checklist of figuring that part out. But that's, the easy way to look at it is we would just go in and do a full market research and say which brand of ours will fit best on that building based upon the money that the owner's willing to put into it.
Brian, what would you say was the one aspect of this entire role that you had for so long? What's the one thing that you enjoyed the most? That you will get up in the morning and say, I am so excited I get to do this today.
Well, the role was a combination of new builds and transitions, right? So what I loved about it was no 2 days in those 10 years when I led the team were ever the same. Now, you may very well be doing some of the same functions, but you're always doing them with new people every day, which is one of the reasons why you love working in a hotel as an operator, because a check-in is a check-in, but you're always doing it with someone different, so it's new to them, right? So there's never the same. Similar with this was, one day I would be working with a high net worth individual who's building and developing a W. And then in the afternoon of that same day, I may be dealing with the city hall government of a convention center hotel that we're building. And then I'm going to be on a plane flying to Bora Bora to talk to the guy and work with the guy who's developing the St. Regis in Bora Bora. That's not work. That's fun. That's getting exposed to so many different people that it was an amazing job. So that's kind of what was always fun for me, was you were always meeting new and very interesting people.
That's cool.
Never a dull moment.
No.
Yes. And how many people was on your team?
At the height of it, I think we had at the height of it about 37 or 38 people, because at that time, you have to remember, we were opening about 15 to 17 hotels a year during the peak. So that means you've got teams there at each one of those, plus you're also working on all the developments that are in the pipeline. Because typically it can take anywhere from 4 to 7 years to get a hotel from, hey, let's create a hotel, to when it's open. And then thrown in there, we were transitioning hotels like in and out of the system monthly. Wow. So you had different teams, and I was just blessed. I had an amazing group of individuals that I think we only had one person turn over in 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate.
So Brian, let's go into the story. We have to know, out of all those years and having worked in so many different markets, what is your mouth opening moment? That one moment that you thought, oh my gosh, if only management would be involved, we could have totally prevented this from happening.
A lot of it was just, and to be honest with you, this is going to sound weird because I know it's WTF and it stands for Walk the Floors or something else. But that what TF moment, there were just times when lack of communication created the WTF, right? Yes. So you would have things like there was a very large hotel in a southern state that Stephanie loves, um, that was going to open, and it was owned by a union that worked on pipes, we'll say, plumbers and pipes. And 2 months before we were going to open, they had a massive pipe failure and flooded the entire, lobby space, which is a huge lobby space. And you just have to sit back and chuckle and say, wait a second, a hotel that's owned by the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union had a pipe burst,
What are the
and
odds?
just what are the odds? And it cost them, I forget the total amount, but the delay of costs and everything else, we delayed that hotel opening, I think, about 2-3 months just because of that, because it was so big. And you just, to your point, you just kind of walk in the morning that day and say, how does this happen? Right? Because theoretically, that should have never happened. And then you have other situations where you just have ownership groups that sometimes get ahead of themselves telling people things, and it doesn't happen. So that, they may have told, there was one situation where an ownership group told their existing hotel and property that it was going to be converted to X, Y, and Z. And we walked in there never having seen the property and said, no, we're not taking this one. So now you've got this thing of all of these poor people, because the one thing you have to remember in transitions, there's a functional component of it that's very important, but the real important part is the people, because you're affecting people's lives, right? So if you're the general manager and the team working at a hotel in Topeka, Kansas, and they think someone's going to come in and change the brand and change the management, they're on pins and needles. Am I going to be out of a job? All of those things. So making sure that you are transparent, that you are honest, and that you know how to communicate and when to communicate is so drastically important. Otherwise, these things go sideways like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. I
And this
appreciate that you say that. I've been through many transitions on a much smaller scale, taking over departments at a time as opposed to entire operations. And it is critical. If we don't communicate with those who are already there the right way, in a caring way, where we are explaining things like they are adults, then it's very, your possibilities of things going sideways are 100% there.
Oh,
mhm.
absolutely. I mean, just think about your benefits package, your medical benefits. God forbid you've got a child or a spouse who needs medical attention, and now you hear a new company's coming in. What's my medical? Am I going to have benefits? Do they provide them? How
Absolutely.
do they compare? So the transparency and the art of communication. Yeah, we, trial and error. We, hit some speed bumps sometimes, but I think by the end we got it down to a science. But that to me is the absolute biggest key, because people's lives are, and you just don't want them having all that angst, and then they get, they think of things or they hear things that aren't correct, and I'm going to leave, and then they quit, and we said, well, we didn't want you to quit, we wanted you to stay. Well, somebody said you weren't giving benefits. It just it's crazy.
Yeah. I'd say also too the ones that, were we call them the lifers in the brand. So, if they've spent already say 15 years with one particular brand and now they're getting ready to retire, or they're close, like Marriott, when you're at I think it's 25 years, you now get
Mhm.
all these other benefits with free stays and things. And then now they transition to a completely different brand, and now you've just lost out all of that seniority that you had going, because you knew you were so close to getting those other perks of the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it all comes back to human interaction,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Yes.
all the functional part of a transition is all done via checklist. It's very mechanical. It's very methodical. A trained monkey could do it, obviously, if I did it. Um, but you really just have to focus it on the people aspect of it and make
Yes.
sure that you are, communicating properly. And again, to your point, when you get these employees who have dedicated 15, 20 years of their life to a property. Typically, it's all been with the same company. And now you're coming in to change them, and they're looking at the company and say, why are you deserting me? What are you know, and then, 9 times out of 10, you try and help them go with the company that's leaving if you can, because that's so important. And so it's just a matter of taking each case individually.
Yep. And sometimes it's actually more beneficial. They'll carry on like the severance package, and other incentives that the other brand was carrying, and pretty much like grandfather you in now to the new brand as if you were working with the new brand for so long. But a lot of people, the first thing that they hear is, oh, we're going to transition, I'm going to lose my job. And especially too with how the staffing market is now, it's like, no, we're going to take you all on with us as well. It's just, sometimes we've been seeing all these mergers happen with brands too. And, those are the times when things then start to get a little in a sticky situation. But for right on to the property, just getting that communication.
Yeah, I remember one transition, there was just this massive fear for whatever reason that we were going to let everybody go. And so at, I think, the first or the second public meeting we had with everybody in the ballroom or the meeting room, I finally just said, okay, everybody come with me. And they kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, come with me. So we went down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the parking lot. And if I remember correctly, it was like, 50 degrees. So it wasn't real warm, but I brought and then there was like maybe 78 employees. Walked all the way out to the driveway into the parking lot. And I stood there and they said, what are we doing here? I said, look around. So they all started looking around. And I said, what do you see? They said, we see cars, trees, whatever. I said, so you don't see any buses with our employees waiting to take your jobs, right? We don't have busloads of people. There's nobody coming. We need all of you to stay on. We want all of you to stay on. And the light bulbs you could see going up over their head. But it was the only way I could show them, metaphorically, I guess, that we weren't going to let them all go. I said, there's just not a bus. We don't have a busload of employees. We need you all. And so it went much better after that. But I remember doing that once, just to calm the nerves, because somehow they'd gotten bad information.
Yeah. And just thinking of, if you didn't do that, so many other of those employees could have probably quit before the transition, or got this misinformation. And then, now regretting they left. And then they're like, oh, if someone just would have really like told me in layman's term instead of all this technical term, then I would have got it and understood, okay, my job's safe. Same routines, same, hotel, same schedule. But no one really took the time to make sure that, the employees really understood.
Yep.
I'd say my WTF moment with transitions, I always love finding like a coaster or a napkin or like a paper pad or a pen from like the previous brand that was 10, 15 years ago. And I'm like, how is this still in the building? And it's probably like in the storage closet, the employees getting it to stock up and not even realizing, and then all of a sudden seeing like items from brands that were part of the property a long time ago. I just always find that so funny.
Well, what's scary is I remember doing one transition, and we were, in the old days before you young ladies were born, we used to have guest room directories, right? And on the first page was always this silly welcome note from the general manager. I found a welcome note in a room, a welcome page in the directory from the previous brand. And we figured out at the end of the day, it was like 3 or 4 GMs ago. So nobody, and I know this will freak you out, Stephanie, but nobody had changed that front page in that room. It had to be like 3 years or something. It was hilarious. It was, again,
nope.
You just can't believe it.
Nope, not walking the floors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they weren't even crawling.
Well, this has been great. Well, thank you so much, Brian.
I didn't tell my story.
Wait a
minute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So
Sorry,
my
sorry.
WTF or my favorite moment, like Stephanie said, during transitions has to be when you find those keys to those very specific storage spaces that no one knew about.
Oh,
And now you're
yes.
finding all these extra inventory that no one knew about, right? And as you go through the different areas in the hotel and you realize, well, why are we setting this out? Well, because we don't have any. And all of a sudden you go into the attic, and the attic is like a treasure hunt. There's all these things going on. So that's definitely my most exciting moment when I go through our transition, when I start finding the treasures.
Well, one more story. I know we're short on time, but one more story. So, I was in a hotel, and I was the new GM. And to your point, it wasn't really a transition, but we were doing some work to the property. And so I said to the director of engineering, who has since turned out to be one of my best friends in the entire world, so I can tell this story. I won't mention his name or the hotel, but he'll know when he listens. Um, so I kept seeing this door, which was under the grand staircase in the lobby. And I said to him finally, I said, let's go in there. He said, no, you don't need to be in there. So long story short, 3 weeks in, I finally said to him, I said, listen, young man, I'm the general manager. My master key doesn't work in there. Let's go in there. Walked in there, and he had, I don't know how many TVs it was. It had to be,
Oh, no.
now this was a 500 and something room hotel. He had to have close to like 100 of the old TVs. And I said, we'll just call him Joe. I said, Joe, what are we doing with 100 old pieces of crap TV? We could be using this as, he says, well, you never know where you're going to need pieces. And I said, you get them out of there. And it was like, I found 100 and something TVs we gave away or we threw away or whatever we did with them. But to your point, Michele, these hidden storerooms all over each hotel that only like a director of engineering knows, or a banquet manager who's been there for 20 something years, and to your point, stashes them and then forgets them.
Yes.
Saw that a lot.
Oh yeah. Or it's their own little break room. There's so many times when they see that, you're coming in for the transition and they're like, "Oh, that's just storage."
Yep.
Move on the tour of the property. And it's like, "No, I want to see what's in there." And then they're like, "Oh no." And then it's like their little hideout where
Busted.
they
They have the whole
go,
setup.
yeah. Exactly. I'm like, well, we will be changing this.
Exactly.
Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Brian, for helping us through understanding what really takes place when a hotel brand is transitioning. Very interesting conversation. I'm sure a lot of the operators, especially in the audience, who may not be as familiar as what happens behind the scenes and what it takes, they'll find this episode extremely insightful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun talking to you lovely young ladies.
Thank you. And where can our audience be able to check out your podcast?
Well, it's on all the platforms. It's called Tuesday Thanks. And it's a simple concept that I started during the pandemic of every Tuesday I used to, on LinkedIn, thank an individual who made a big impact on my career. So now I interview hospitality leaders and other leaders about their journey and offer them the platform to thank somebody who has helped them along the way. So it's been a real big passion. We're on our third season now, and just announced we're going to be able to take Tuesday's Thanks on the road to your company events, so that when your teams win, we can do a podcast right there, record it, get it on the airwaves. So all the people back in the properties who can't make it to these lovely GM of the Year meetings, it'll allow the winners to thank those people, and they'll hear it and they can share it with families and friends. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Brian. And we'll look forward to hearing another episode of your podcast.
Super. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.